Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. In today's video, I want to talk in a bit more detail directly following yesterday's podcast on the Dan Ashworth situation explicitly and go into just a bit more detail for me as to my understanding of what has happened and where the relationship kind of broke down and why there were actually some signals of this already occurring and in some ways the writing was on the wall. I'll also talk about some other stories that are out there, Sir Jim, the Rashford stories, and a few other things, as well as January transfers and the replacement for Dan Ashworth. So, but yeah, really mostly a deep dive into the Ashworth thing today to kind of understand it and look at it. So let's start with the whole Ashworth side of things. So obviously, he was sacked. The mutual departures are essentially just a sacking. And, if you recall, just to go back to where this all started in the last season, I shared information pretty regularly on the situation that was Erik Ten Hag's future. And this is really at the core to all of this. It really is. Unfortunately, a situation that was dealt with so poorly in the end and viewed by ownership as a huge mistake, the way that it ended up going through summer and beyond. That was just a huge waste of time, cost, and resources, all things said. Before INEOS even got in, they'd already essentially made the assessment that Erik Ten Hag was not the guy. The first links to Ruben Amorim from INEOS started in November, prior to them even getting into the club, through a report that was dashed by club media, but was ultimately correct, just not technically correct because INEOS were not yet in the door. And they were very interested in Amorim at that time via conversations with perhaps Omar Barada and some others that they use as advisors. That being said, the decision to hire Dan Ashworth originally came purely from the INEOS side. He's close with Sir Dave Brailsford, and he was someone that he believed would be... remember, Dave Brailsford had a lot of involvement in the first 6 months at United, and he was someone that he believed from his experience in working with people who are in football, even though he's not a football guy himself, would be the best man for the job that he knew personally and thought would be successful in this position. That is the main reason he was hired. He was earmarked for the role before they spoke with and hired Omar Barada. Obviously, that's where the problem starts. He's somebody that they were expected to give a significant role to and a lot of leeway, but they hired him before they hired his boss and before they got in the door at United, and sometimes things just don't work out. Regardless, they had a few assessments, and starting with it, they also brought in Jason Wilcox at the behest of Omar Barada, who knows him. This was not my information. This was reported by others back in March and April when it was happening, that Omar Barada recommended Jason Wilcox, having worked with him, having experience with him. A lot of alignment between Jason Wilcox and Omar Barada in their views. Jason Wilcox set about to assess the team, assess the squad, assess Erik Ten Hag, all of that. All of this. We've been through it. His recommendation was made officially for Erik Ten Hag to be sacked on May 14th, and he stood by that very firmly throughout summer as well, that was the correct call to make. INEOS at the time wanted Dan Ashworth to be the kingmaker, the guy who essentially would be responsible for making the tough calls on the manager, getting the right person in the door, all of that. They didn't feel they had that. There was some difficulty there. And in the conversations with him, I believe he had wanted them to keep it and not appoint somebody so that he could appoint the right person if they, in the end, had to decide to sack Ten Hag and move on. So all of that kind of happened and led to a point where Ashworth got in the building and they kept Erik Ten Hag. Now, I think there's a lot of stories throughout that have come out since that are overdramatic as it comes to his influence on summer, and I'll tell you exactly why. First of all, most of the targets that we signed were contacted prior to Dan Ashworth being in the building, and were contacted directly by Jason Wilcox or Omar Barada previously. Lenny Yoro, Joshua Zirkzee, Manuel Ugarte, all of them really, even including Delict, but also Braithwaite and others, have been followed and been contacted months and months and months before Dan Ashworth is in the building. So I don't believe the stories, that all the targets were necessarily run by Dan Ashworth. Jason Wilcox had a bigger influence on recruitment than anything else, and a big role in there. Now, that being said, Dan Ashworth was responsible essentially then for overseeing everything that was going on as the director of football. And as the season started and the results continued to be poor and the play on the field continued to be poor and the assessment of the coaches and the manager and what was happening continued to be fairly poor, I said this during the first international break that Sir Jim was starting to get kind of fed up. And then again during the next international break, that Sir Jim was starting to get really fed up with how things were going. And look, it's as simple as this. They already decided Ten Hag wasn't their guy. They kept him essentially because they wanted Dan Ashworth to be the one to make the call and to appoint the right person in that case. We'll talk about Dan Ashworth's decisions here in a minute. But going into the October break, it started to get really, really ugly because by that point in time, Sir Jim had made it very, very clear. Something needs to be done about this. I shared this very explicitly that Sir Jim said something needs to be done about it or he will have to step in. Things need to improve. And he gave them the wherewithal to make a change and said, look, I need ideas. Who do we get? Start looking, start figuring it out. And if you decide on who to get, and you want to go for them, then get them. The problem was Dan Ashworth was far too weak and indecisive in his eyes to make this happen. He was far too weak and indecisive to actually make this happen and to follow through with it. He continued to push for more time. He continued to have a look at candidates that weren't convincing and not present a convincing argument to those in charge about it, and continued to just suggest that United sit on it a little bit. Here's some of the things that I shared that I want to show. This is from Discord in the Patreon channels where I talk a lot. You can start actually here at the bottom. I really get the idea Dan Ashworth will do a lot more to try and support him first. This was about Eric Ten Hag. You've seen all this confirmed. He was supportive of keeping Ten Hag. And then these were all around the same message. I put it on Ashworth then right now, and then by the next break, it's on SJR and co for not sacking Ashworth. And if Ashworth doesn't deal, I think Ashworth has been made, it actually goes this way, I think Ashworth has been made known this can't continue, and if he doesn't deal, I put it on Ashworth right now, and by the next break, it's on SJR and co for not sacking him. And essentially, the perspective I was getting was that Ashworth was pushing for him to stay for more time, for all of that, but it will be on... If they were to accept that, then it becomes on them for letting him push that and continue it if results were continuing, to go. On the 9th, as I put it in simple words, Ten Hag can be sacked. The owners have given approval. SJR had already said, Sir Jim had already said, Ten Hag can go. I want him gone. Ashworth and co would prefer more time, but they've been told things need to improve. They're exploring alternative plans and strategy. If they come up with something they feel better, they have permission to do it. But this is where he was weak in pushing it. I was being very critical of Dan Ashworth from the things I was hearing here. For example, Dan Ashworth, his blind spot is how to properly run a football team. Don't know how we missed that. They fucked it, and the longer it goes on, the less confidence I have in Ashworth and co to bring us where they need to be. This was on the 24th, and then they eventually did make the change pretty quickly after that. But regardless, the takeaway from all of that is, as far as I was hearing it, quite honestly, Dan Ashworth was being extremely weak and just making things happen and getting it done, what was needed to get done, to fix things, and they were completely unimpressed by that, even with Sir Jim having pushed that some change needed to happen and that this was unacceptable. And their preconceived notion was that Ten Hag wasn't the right guy, and they were convinced by Dan Ashworth as the guy they hired to do it. But if he was to be weak and ineffective on this front, then essentially he would tie his horse to his cart to the Ten Hag horse there, and he was not coming up with better suggestions. But that's not the only thing, and I want to share that. I have a whole lot of stuff here from conversations that I've had that I want to share very directly. Okay, number one, Jason Wilcox had already been impressing them in their eyes as somebody who knew what he was doing, and they felt he was more effective in his role even before Ashworth got in than Ashworth was once he got in the door, and that's not a good sign. During the break, when Sir Jim said things are bad, you have to fix them or I'll be forced to, it was Omar Barada who stepped up in the drive to get the replacement and take the job over. More on that in a minute. Dan Ashworth is not pushing for Southgate once he was in the building. Okay. He brought it up to them a few times during interviews in the early part of the process, but not since summer. They told him it was a non-starter. However, it is totally true he wasn't in favor of Amram as top choice. So you remember all the grief that I got? We'll get back to that in a second on the first choice section. Sir Jim was also unhappy with his assessments of players to keep and sell. He found that his opinions were differing from the other appointments that were made too often, and in his eyes, a lack of ruthlessness and decisiveness in terms of which players they needed to keep and which players they wanted to go. For better or worse, Sir Jim is showing quite a bit of tendency towards the ruthlessness on this side of it. He wants them to be hard on selling players, on getting players out the door as quick as possible. He feels that they did not make enough of an effort during summer to get rid of more than they could have. At the moment, so I'll go back to that. Sir Jim also feels the situation is even worse than he's let on. Their hope for Ashworth was in some respects his philosophy as well of the academy and the youth prospects and all of that, which can grow over the span of 4 or 5 years and start to pay dividends. But they are feeling the pressure of this more and more, that things need to improve, and especially financially, the clock is ticking. What they want to see out of the academy is, again, a bit more ruthlessness there in the right way. When you look at how City and Chelsea operate, much quicker to sell their academy products if they're not going straight into the first team. Yes, buybacks, sell-ons, things like that, but much, much quicker. So in the past, we've had many instances, guys like Chong, Garner, etc. We've held on to them way too long, and we've seen that time and time again. We've seen that with like guys like Hugo, Charlie McNeil, players like this where they've been promising. They haven't really made it in the first team. We have players like this, Ethan Wheatley, etc. Are they going to make it in the team? If not, sell. And that's what he wants. And so essentially the idea of keep the Kobbie Mainus, the guys who can make it right in and be much quicker to move on the other academy prospects, who are getting into that senior age, to help with the profitability of the club. Selling those academy products makes a massive difference rather than keeping them around for 2 years and losing them for free when you could be getting 5, 10, 15 million in profit on them, and including buybacks and things like that. They started this process this summer, but they want to be way more on this than they have been. They've been looking at the assessment of United's transfer profiles for Ruben Amorim and the way that they want to build the team, and they've found huge roadblocks with Dan Ashworth. This is why this decision has been taken as of now. They felt that in summer, the blocks between him and Eric not aligning with everybody else and not aligning with each other slowed business down and could have been very damaging. Things like the Ugarte McTominay situation otherwise had a huge impact on his inability to resolve these kinds of situations effectively. And they do not feel that Dan Ashworth is aligned with Ruben Amorim's ideas, where Wilcox and Omar and others are very well aligned with how he wants to build the team, and that keeping him would set us back significantly in the long run on the transfer front. So a lot of sensible reasons here that are not about saying Dan Ashworth is a bad director. He's just not the right one for us, and not the right one for this situation, and not the right one for the kind of high performance urgency and intensity and decisiveness that we need at this point in time. Moving on to the first choice aspect. So you remember I caught a lot of grief for saying Ruben Amorim wasn't first choice, and you got all these briefings about him being the top choice. And now, after the fact, suddenly, you're getting all these briefings saying that Ashworth was suggesting a whole bunch of other people. Now, how was he top choice if the guy who was appointed to hire the managers and given the job of assessing and delivering his choices for managers was suggesting Thomas Frank as his top choice? And now that's all being admitted. And that's the truth. And that is a lot of times the issue with the assessment of information, delays, things like that, questions about information, is it's not just what the info is, but who. Ruben Amorim was not the top choice unanimously at United. Now people are admitting that despite the briefings from before. Just like before, now they're admitting that in summer, 100% INEOS and everybody wanted to sack Ten Hag. Just like, they're admitting that it was all held up on Dan Ashworth. A lot of things come out after the fact that were true even back then, and time always tell. So my information there, 100% correct. That's why I said I stand by it. Ruben Amorim was not the top choice. And but he was for Omar Barada. And Omar Barada is the one who stepped up and took over Dan Ashworth's job and said, I'm going to get this done now. And this is someone who will work, that you should hire, that you should get, that will work for what you want, Sir Jim, and made it happen and has impressed them mightily with his decisiveness in this area. And that was the moment Dan Ashworth was finished at United, period. Anyway, just a point there. On Sir Jim, obviously there's been a lot of talk about him. He did the interview with Andy Mitten, who was quite impressed with him based on his talk to the Devils and otherwise. Obviously there's a lot of negativity surrounding certain things, but here's the point, right? And I'm not saying this is always correct or not, but I see people go, oh, you're losing fan support, you're losing fan credit. And once again, I say, forget fans when it comes to football decisions, because the fans are a big reason why. The fan sentiment was a big reason why we kept Erik Ten Hag. And we're in this huge mess through summer despite their decisions, and Sir Jim knows that. And all it's done is set us back 15 million time and waste instead of getting started quicker on the project that they wanted to. And he has realized that certainly and decided he needs to be a lot more pushy on when we make a football decision, it has to go through regardless. And we're going to have to take these unpopular decisions. That's why he's saying that the summer was a big lesson for him, that the fan support doesn't really last. And that's what I said. You can look at him now getting all the blame for where we're at and having to now take financial decisions that were made because he in part made a fan decision in summer. Now, I'm not saying you don't listen to the fans on things like the stadium and costs and all that. I get it. I understand it. I'm not in disagreement. But his intention is to get the club back to the top level. His intention is not to make any money. So we may not like some of the decisions, and some of them may be wrong for sure. But he is more than determined to be way more ruthless, I can tell you that, and to not waffle around at all and be indecisive or to waste time. He wants to get things done fast, quickly, and immediately on all fronts, really, really heavily now. So we can expect potentially more changes as well. Not necessarily as high profile, but more. And he's probably going to be making, on the football side of things, he will be very firm in his view that the club should not be doing things just because fans want them, but because they think it's the right call. Again, there has to be a differentiation between that on a football standpoint and other aspects that are more involving of the fans. But I can tell you he's not going to make that mistake again like he did with Ten Hag in the summer. When they should have been more ruthless on that front. He knew it was the right call. He listened to Dan Ashworth, listened to fans, and gave it the benefit of the doubt. And in the end, it only cost the club a lot of money and time. So on that side of things, he will, just a fact, agree, disagree, he will be more ruthless on this front. And the urgency of the situation is growing to them all. In terms of Rashford, so there's a story here about, United being concerned about his lifestyle, blah, 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 and may sell him this summer. I'll tell you right now that story has been around for 2.5 years, okay? I take it with a bit of a grain of salt, given where it's coming from. That story has been around for a long time. It's preceded INEOS people coming in about some concerns over lifestyle, this, that, and the other thing that are going on. And I'm not going to sit and defend or say it's true or not true or something like that. But that story's been going around since he was having an amazing season 2 seasons ago. Still too much talk around him. They have not decided to sell him. They are in a position, however, where, as I stated, and this is a fact, they want to see if he gets going this year. And if he isn't going up to the level that is expected of him, then it will most likely be mutual that perhaps a departure is on the cards. Fans have been almost absurdly difficult on him. When you look at what's going on right now, and I'm not going to get into it in detail, but you have quite a number of big accounts that are connected with other players that spend all day attacking Marcus Rashford and supporting someone, and it's kind of nasty, this whole thing that's going on. It really is, and it just is. It's pretty nasty. And I'm not going to get into the game of then attacking another player, because I like Marcus, but I'm not going to go into that. But there's a hell of a lot of people doing that right now, and they've been pushing and hoping and waiting for the day that they can make this happen. And it's a bit odd that this is being allowed to go on, but people are being made aware of it. Regardless, if it doesn't work out, if he doesn't improve in his form, if he doesn't find his place in Ruben Amorim's starting 11, then obviously, there's a good chance that he could be sold. And but it would be mutual. He had a lot of interest from a number of big clubs, Bayern, Arsenal, and others over summer, and that interest would remain, as well as PSG and Barcelona too. That interest would remain from them. There's a lot of clubs that rate him quite highly, and if it became suitable for both parties, even though it's not what he wanted or what anybody wanted really, then it would be sensible. But as with anybody else, this is the part of the ruthlessness and decisiveness. If he's not performing, or if he's not just getting into starting 11 and it doesn't justify the wages, then he will be looked to move on, same as anybody else. And that's true for every single player at this club, including young players. There's no guaranteed spots just to keep you just because you're young, or just because you've been successful at United, or just because you've been there a long time. This is the way it is for everybody. But the story is a little bit being made of on this personal thing that's been around a long time. I know where it comes from. It's not about that. It's a matter of whether he will perform and whether he can get into Amorim's starting 11 and fit or not. That's it. And that's the only question that matters right now. In terms of January and the director of football, I do, again, say that I believe United will be active in January. It's one of the reasons I believe they've moved Dan Ashworth on now, is the assessments of profiles, what they're looking for, what they want to get. Even as soon as January was not in alignment, and they cannot afford to waste this window. That being said, I think it's more likely that it'll be Jason Wilcox and Vivell. From everything I hear, again, I've said many, many times how impressive Jason Wilcox has been. Vivell is someone liked. He was brought in post Omar Barada arriving, and then there's Sam Arith, I think his name is, right? Who's also in there. I believe they feel they may have enough people for this, and that they'll just shift the responsibilities up and around, and that they'll have the coverage for this between Wilcox and Vivell. And that way they will all be in alignment and have the experience needed. So I would suggest that we may not be bringing a director in anytime soon to replace this role. And certainly financially, they're not going to want to spend a bunch more money on another director. So, if they feel they have what they need. And that was part of the whole situation as well, is that there was they felt they got a lot out of the people who were already there that they'd brought in, between Omar, Wilcox, Vivell, all of that. And they may have what they need to get recruitment right. But they want to make some moves in January, if possible, in order to help United get back to where they need to, especially in the Champions League, as it would make a big financial difference. And part of that is also selling players and potentially moving them on. As we talked about, Christian Eriksen, Anthony, Casemiro, big prospects to move on to free up wages that would allow them to make a move in January. So I would expect it'll be run by Wilcox and Vivell for January and even into summer potentially, based on how things have gone. Okay, I hope this all explains everything going on at the moment, provides a little more context, a little more information on the whole Ashworth thing and where it is all at, as well as what's happening at the club. Definitely some growing pains. Definitely good that they've corrected this mistake early on. The person that they hired on the basis of not from Omar Barada, but from their own personal connections, that they've been willing to cut that cord, tells you there's no, sticking with it just because of loyalty. It's no nepotism. It's no jobs for the boys. It's you perform or you're fucking out. And that applies to every player, applies to every coach, applies to every staff. It applies to everybody at United. Some people aren't happy with it, but that's the way that it is. The urgency is there from Sir Jim, understanding the finances of the club, that it is more desperate than it seems, and that we need to be successful quicker than ever. Okay, that's what I have for today. Thank you for watching this video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on. See you in the next one.